This book is challenging in a lot of ways to talk about because there are so many facets. You know, there's a parenting narrative, there's an education narrative, there's a heavily China angle. And so I'm going to try to cover a little bit of everything. And some might be more interested in some angles than others, but bear with me. And the parenting narrative, to me, it seems to be the one sort of resounding with the general public. And I think it's important because I feel that it draws attention to a topic to sort of an audience that normally wouldn't pick up a book about China, a reported book about China. And I feel it's really good to sort of get the message out there. In 2010, my husband and I moved to Shanghai, which is China's largest city. We're American journalists. He covers China for NPR. And we happen to have a little boy, so we're parents. And just down the street was one of the best state-run Chinese schools in the city. It seemed like a good idea. Our son would learn Mandarin. He would get a dose of that sort of Chinese-style discipline, which I experienced growing up. My parents were Chinese immigrants to the US, but I grew up in American public schools. So, you know, my son's teacher the first year, her name is Teacher Chen. She's not a big person, but she's actually quite slender, but I am constantly terrified of her. And I remember her teeth because when I saw them, I knew I was in trouble because it was always a grimace. She never smiled. So the first week of school, my son comes home, and he's only 3 at the time, and he says, "My teacher forced me to eat eggs." I say, "Oh, that's very interesting." So I sort of run off to school to confront her, which is something that you would do in the US. "Teacher Chen, I heard you forced my son to eat eggs." She said, "Yes, I did." I say, "Well, in the US, we don't use methods of force. We incent our children to choose option A over option B." And she says, you know, the teeth come out, "Does it work?" And I have to admit, not always. And later, you know, when I was talking to her, my son was here, and later she scolds me for challenging her authority in front of a child. So very quickly I understand that teacher knows best. I learned a few other things. Parents are required to be full partners in a Chinese education. My son's principal, in my mind, also a very formidable figure in the book because I'm a little scared of her too. She tells a group of parents at orientation, "We don't pick children, we pick parents." I once met a mother who bought 2 flutes, one for her daughter and one for herself so she could practice alongside. I like that kind of parent. And I look around in the auditorium, there are 300 parent heads sort of bobbing, and I realize I'm in for, you know, more than I bargained for. There are also a lot of communications in a Chinese education, notices, permission slips, emails to respond to, all with directives for the parent, work to complete at home, books for the parents to read, tasks to perform on behalf of administrators. There was also a classroom blog. And here I wanted to read a short passage from the book just to show you, just to give you a little bit of sense of the humor in the parenting narrative. Everyone's familiar with WeChat, of course, right? So most bothersome of all to me was the WeChat parent group, which kept me tethered to my phone at all hours of the day and night. WeChat is an instant messaging platform more popular than email. Through this mobile app, the teachers would communicate their every command. Now remember, these are 3-year-olds, so this is preschool content. This week, we're starting the I Love My Family theme. We'll start by painting pictures of the mother. Mothers, please bring a photo of yourself to school. Please reply in the affirmative. Keeping up with daily instructions like this were part of the job. Sometimes the teacher's directives were bewildering. Bring plastic fish to school. Or they were troubling. Health check is tomorrow, so tell your child he must endure the finger prick without fear. Or antithetical to my belief about the strength of the human body. Today the weather is cold, so children cannot play outdoor sports. They must rest inside where it is warm. Other times, teachers deployed parents as free labor. Tear out all of your children's worksheets and affix them to the corresponding lesson page. That day, my son Rainey marched home 7 workbooks, and we set up a mini factory on our dining room table, tearing worksheets, reshuffling papers, and stapling for hours. "Shouldn't this be the school's responsibility? Or a teacher's aide?" my husband asked, picking up a stapler. I shook my head. Parents are full partners in a Chinese education, and pity the mother who overlooked a WeChat message and failed to bring plastic fish to school. As the weeks passed, the barrage of daily WeChats continued, and my anxiety levels continued to creep up. A parent's reply to a teacher's WeChat was expected to be immediate, if not instantaneous, and keeping up with this daily flow of information was part of the job. Before long, I realized what troubled me the most. it was the other parents. It all began to feel like a race, as if we were playing endless rounds of musical chairs, and the last parent to respond would immediately have her chair kicked out from underneath her. A teacher would message, "Do any parents own tortoise or hare clothing for a role play exercise?" Within seconds, a cacophony of mothers would chime in, and my phone buzzed with each message. "Yes, I do, teacher, you work so hard." "I have tortoise and hare clothing." "I will go shopping immediately. Teacher, you are too amazing." "I received the message. We will do exactly as you say." One overachieving parent wrote that she had not only tortoise and hare clothing, but also frogs, goldfish, and tadpole clothing. Others immediately launched a search for animal costumes, or at least they announced their diligence on WeChat. I didn't see the point of the role play, nor did I care to dress up my 3-year-old son in reptilian clothing, but I wanted to keep my chair on this particular day, so I broadcast my own enthusiasm. "Teacher, will do, right away." 太辛苦了, right? So, humorous, but this is all true. You ask any Chinese parent, and it's just the WeChats, 300-400 a day in a class of 30 kids. It's exhausting, but that's everyone's involved in education. So, as I said, my husband and I moved to Shanghai in 2010, and it was a monumental year in global education because that year Shanghai teenagers took #1 in the world on a test called PISA, math, reading, and science. They beat out teenagers in nearly 70 countries, and the US sort of fell somewhere in the middle of the heap. And what was interesting to me was that the narratives were so polarizing. On the left here you have Thomas Friedman. He wrote a column called The Shanghai Secret, which got a lot of attention. The Shanghai Secret in Education. But then there was a counter narrative, rote learning robots, no creativity. So clearly you feel, there's some threatening messages, there's some sort of jealousy and envy. What is really going on? And why it's important to unravel these messages or these questions. A few numbers to consider. American universities are taking 5 times as many Chinese as a decade ago. The Ivy League, it's 8 times as many. And it's also becoming a more globalized marketplace for jobs, right? We're all sitting here together. And so it's really important to understand Chinese educational and cultural values really from as objective a standpoint as possible because it contributes to greater understanding. What was interesting to me was inside China, this was the reaction to PISA. On the left there, Zhang Mingquan, he's the guy who actually ran PISA. He administered the PISA tests in Shanghai. He said, PISA does not mean we have a good fundamental education. There's definitely some dissatisfaction there. Yang Dongping, he's probably one of the most famous Chinese education reformers inside China. He's looking with jealousy across to other countries who did just as well, but those kids spent half the time in study. So this is very interesting to me. There's my son in the back, very quickly. We're jumping around a little bit. Second to the back. I like that he's sort of going up when everyone else is going forward. To me, that makes me feel a little bit better. Okay, we'll just stop there for a second. So it's important to understand in China that education is a sorting mechanism, right? You basically advance to the next level based on a test score. 18 million babies born every year. In the US, it's 4 million just for comparison, so you can get a sense of the difference in scale. And if immediately, especially in urban primary schools, you're worried about that entrance exam at the primary level. I talked to parents who, their 3-year-olds were in 8 extracurriculars. There's a whole cottage industry. There's the early MBA. There's flute. One family had soccer, and there was also pinyin and English, everything just to sort of differentiate yourself to the point where she gets into primary school. You want to stand out to the principal. There's a lot of anxiety. What's most devastating is when you get to that high school entrance exam, 16 to 18 million students take that exam and half fail. And then when you get to the college entrance exam, that's the one that gets a lot of media coverage in the West. But really, to me, it's the high school exam that's most interesting, and I'll tell you why later. But at the college level, another third fail. And then the very top tier, it's really only a few 100,000. So this is a high-stakes exam-based system. That is really important to understand. It's, in the US, we sort of educate every child, or we like to think that we educate every child. And in China, there's a certain level of comfort with having people drop out of the system. Let's see, tests, more tests. This framework drives values and ill effects on students. And this is really what's driving a lot of the reform efforts in China. They're really trying to change everything you can think of, giving kids 2 chances to take that college entrance exam. They're installing psychologists in Shanghai. I talked to one of them and she said, I would love for students to come see me, but they're too busy studying, so my office is always empty. So they're trying all sorts of things. Another problem with Chinese education is this sort of top-down teacher culture. I basically launched an investigation. I started interviewing parents. I find students that I trail over a number of years, 5 or 6 years. I start talking to international education experts to unravel some of these questions, and I also eventually get into classrooms at all levels. So I once observed a Chinese teacher trying to show kids how to draw rain, and really this is how, I don't know if any of you remember this, but rain falls from the sky to the ground and it comes in little dots, and there's only one way to draw rain in this classroom. But if you think about it, there's figurative rain, it rains cats and dogs. Prince would say there's purple rain. If you live in Houston, there's hurricanes. So when people talk about a lack of independent expression in the classroom, what I saw was true. Usually kids are generally discouraged from a very early age in expressing sort of creative ideas or, ideas that are sort of outside the norm of what the teacher would be happy to see. I also have a chapter about gray money in the system. Gifting is a very important part of any relationship in Chinese culture. Reciprocity is often expected. So I discovered reports of teachers assigning seating based on gifts, giving grades based on gifts. One Chinese parent in my Shanghai school says, Western skincare or luxury is great. She says Louis Vuitton, Prada, L'Occitane, Clinique, Godiva. I try to participate, not for seating, but just as a cultural token of appreciation, but I get it all wrong. I didn't realize that Coach was last year, and now it's Tory Burch. Anyway, the point is, the government is actually trying to stamp out some of this because they feel it contributes to inequality, and it does. There is a lot of gray money in the system, and families who are better resourced clearly can buy access to tutors and other things, and even seats in class. So the government a couple of years ago said, okay, blanket ban on teachers accepting gifts, blanket ban on tutoring services outside the classroom. So back to, my slides are a little bit out of order, but so this is little Junjun. And this is 2 minutes before he has to take this national high school entrance exam. And I followed his family for 5 years. He's there in that yellow t-shirt on the right, and he's trying very hard to ignore me and his mother. So make no mistake, this is a very big day. And it's important to mention prospects for kids in rural China are very different from city kids. And his mother is actually a very good friend of mine now. I met her in 2012. And we'd gotten to the point where she actually invited me out to visit the family 2 days before he has to sit for this high school entrance exam. And this is a big deal because she has not lived with her son since he was a baby. She's a migrant worker, so she and her husband have always lived apart from Junjun. He turns 16, she realizes he's going to fail and fall off the ladder. She rushes home in an attempt to try to save his educational prospects, but she's a little bit too late. Not only that, she's not literate herself, so she can't really help him. So this is the scene in their study room 2 nights before. What's the matter? I asked. His father's name is Father Wang. What's the matter? I asked Wang in Mandarin. Wang's foot tapped the concrete floor. He doesn't understand any of this homework, Wang whispered. Junjun is sitting over at the desk studying. I stood up and I spotted a math test on the desk. He had received 102 out of 150 points. That's not bad, I muttered encouragingly. It's not enough to pass Zongkao, Wang said. I can't even write out this equation, Junjun said, swigging from a glass of green tea. The tea leaves drifted in the beige-yellow liquid, aimless. Junjun was now working on a calculus problem set involving derivative proofs. China's curriculum was famously difficult, and content in heavily populated provinces such as Anhui was particularly advanced, so that I could weed out large numbers of students. Keep trying, his father urged Junjun. Do you sit here every night? I asked the father. Yes, I don't understand any of the papers, but I like to make sure he writes something on every page. His education level is much higher than mine, the father said, lowering his head. Junjun could read and speak some English, but he was testing well on advanced math and already touching upon calculus. He'd already attained what any Westerner would consider a very high level of education for a 16-year-old, but in rural China, this wasn't always enough to get into an academic high school. What will he do next year if he does not pass Zongkao? I don't know, Father Wang sighed. He's so young, I don't know. But Wang knew, even if he wouldn't say. The construction worker was not good with books, but he was wise in the ways of modern China. And he knew Drin would eventually follow the same path his father had 20 years earlier, out to the factories and the building sites. Though I wondered, as China's economy slowed and its manufacturing base inched over to other parts of Asia, whether Drin would be able to find work as easily as his father had. It was 9 p.m. on a school night. Their son was on his last stop in China's 9 years of compulsory education. The family had staked its entire working life on financing him with textbooks, test prep, tutoring, and boarding homes through to the next rung of education, but it appeared Drin was about to fall off the ladder. Lauren and Wang had tried to make up for 15 years of missed parenting, but Zongka was marching towards them full steam. Lauren, my mother friend, his mother, remembers journeying home at Chinese New Year to visit her little third grader, Drin. At the time, he was 9, and he revealed a hatred not only for his name, but the path that it signified. Drin, soldier, that's a stupid name, the boy had said. Who wants to be a soldier anymore? So I just wanted to read that passage just to show that really when all the attention is focused on Shanghai, there's a vast, there's another system really happening in the countryside. And this is one of the top priorities for China, is bringing these kids back onto the educational ladder or developing a vocational track for them so that they somehow either stay in the system or making sure that they have good jobs waiting for them. And this is a priority for China. So let's see, where should I go next? How big is China's school system? I always find it a little bit interesting to sort of just point out, 200 million students in China, 75 million in the US. But if you look over at funding right there in the middle, you only have 188 billion going to educating a system that is basically 3 times the size of the US. US is fairly well funded by comparison. Clearly, China's in a different stage of development. They've had to basically build an education system from scratch and really have built up steam over the last few decades. Compulsory education is really only grades 1 through 9. That's it. And they have managed to achieve that. And now they want at least a year of preschool for most kids, and they want to get at least 90% of their kids into high school and then 40% into university. So they're really working on expanding the system. If you think about that, we have a university system that's really world-class, and secondary as well, and they know that. And that kind of explains why the Chinese are really coming over earlier and earlier. We've already gone over that. Here's just a scene from a countryside school that I taught in for about a year. This is another character in my book. She fails the exam. That's a picture that she just sent me a few months ago. She basically has cycled through as many low-wage jobs as there are years in her life, and now she's working as a masseuse in Xinjiang province. Her friend who had actually passed the exam is now at a second-tier college. So I'd met her 3 years ago. That's a picture of her in the classroom. This, I just wanted to explain. When people ask me the creativity question, I just think, it's interesting. I just think there's a collectivist, there's more of a group thought element to the classroom that I like to point out. I gave a class, this was in rural Henan province, and I passed out a bunch of materials and I said, create your dream. And out of 50 kids, I got something like 48 houses, and 2 wanted world peace, which I thought was great. But these 2 kids did the exact same picture down to the cut and color of the sun. And there's nothing wrong with this. I just wanted to point out how interesting this is, that you really wouldn't see this in the US classroom because of that emphasis on being different, on individual expression. Political curriculum. So this is a drawing. I saw my son, he was only 4 at the time, and he's sitting over by the window, and this comes out. Does anyone know what this is? Yeah, it's Tiananmen. There's Mao in the middle. And there's policemen, and there's guns. So of course I'm a little bit concerned. I wonder what he's been told. Oh, mommy, Tiananmen's just a place in Beijing. Don't you know it? So no mention of a democracy movement or anything that had happened there. And I just wanted to mention that, I have a chapter on political curriculum. It's very interesting. It continues in kindergarten and goes all the way through university. It really intensifies in the middle and high school years. Textbooks are censored, always on message, and it's actually getting a little bit worse. I think some scholars had hoped to go in the other direction, but it's actually tightening up. Just this year, the ministry declared all textbooks in the country would be rewritten to move up the start of the Second Sino-Japanese conflict. It's now 14 years instead of 8. The idea was to incite more hatred of the Japanese and instill patriotism in the Chinese. I like to think that it's not working because what's happening is especially urban elite Chinese who have means to travel, they're going to Japan, they look around, they don't see Japanese devils, and they're picking up a taste for sashimi, right? So what they're told in the classroom often is in conflict with what they're seeing in reality, and I think that that is going to be an issue. I also have 2 high school students in the book. Darcy says to me, much of what I have to write, because he's joining the party at 18, he wants to do everything right and get into the right Chinese college, and he has to write reports about, marching down the Red Road. I ask him, do you believe what you're writing? He says, much of what I have to do is gobbledygook. It's just stuff that I have to do. It's stuff I have to do to get ahead. And his ultimate goal was really outside the reach of Chinese education. He wanted to end up at the graduate school of engineering in Michigan, at the University of Michigan. My other character, Amanda, her conviction was even firmer. The curriculum is all BS. She says it's brainwashing. On the surface, teachers praise socialism. Party members need to write reports, but everyone knows this is not a socialist economy. It's obvious to everyone. So I just wanted to introduce that. There's some reform efforts that, there's only one chapter, but I just wanted to sort of hit home that they're really trying everything. And in a lot of ways, they're looking to us to see what we do to stimulate kids' curiosities, to stimulate a love of learning, and expand. Independent expression is actually a phrase in the National Education Reform Plan of China that came out in 2010. So they're really working on some of these issues. Should I close up in the next couple minutes?
I do have time.
Okay. I did want, when people ask me, why is your son still in the system? What do you like about the system? And I think there's a bit. I should say that the language around effort in the classroom is something that I think that Americans can learn from. That 吃苦, right? Eating bitter. And all the language, if a kid is slipping behind in math or gets a 70, it's not about, oh, don't worry about it, it's fine. It's about everybody get this kid up to the next level, you need to work harder next time. And in fact, all the worksheets come home, needs to work harder, needs to work harder. And that is a message of grit. If you look at studies that have, followed American students over time, we tend to emphasize talent or innate ability when it comes to learning difficult subjects. And the experts say that means we're actually giving up on some kids because we think they don't have what it takes. And that is one of the lessons I feel we should learn from China. And I'm happy that my son has really picked up on that lesson. I wanted to read, because I can't, he does it the best. His name is Jim Stigler. He's a psychologist out of UCLA, and he's been going back and forth between the US and China for years. And he says, with this hard work attitude, Americans are on the right track when it comes to athletics. It's all about getting better, working harder. In American sports, we're okay with competition and struggle. The American conscience is also okay with rankings in sports. A 9th place finish simply indicates a runner should retool and continue training. A 9th place finish does not reflect poorly on a person's self-esteem or worth. But in academics, you don't want to embarrass someone by ranking them number 30 because it's not their fault. In American academics, you either have it or you don't. And that is a real sort of attitude difference between the cultures of the US and China that I felt I should highlight. Another thing is really this belief in so I go into reform. Just very quickly, efforts are slow. Here are 2 teachers who basically say reform takes time. A lot of the change efforts that have been tried, they actually don't see them in the classroom yet. So it's really school by school. There's a lot of policies, and it really depends on how open the principals and the teachers and even the parent community are open to, to trying some of these things. So it's quite slow. Trends in Chinese education. So this belief in effort over talent. So we get it right in sports. And the second is really I think memorize what needs memorizing. There's a few lessons, but I think this one is quite important. And it's really useful in subjects like math. Kids, I found in second grade math classrooms in China were memorizing multiplication tables and already moving on to higher order concepts. And the equivalent is something like fourth or fifth grade in the average American public school. And the education experts say it's a little bit too late, but there's sort of a backlash against putting more rigor into the classroom because I think in part, we're afraid that kids can't get it. We're afraid that kids will feel bad about themselves. So I just wanted to finish up with a passage, a parent passage. This is a conversation that my husband and I have often between ourselves because there was a lot of anxiety about how we, about our journey in this system. Let's see if I can find it. So this is a conversation, and I'd like to bring this out because this is a conversation that a lot of Shanghai parents have as well. When I look at the parent community that I'm in, there's not a lot of difference between the conversations that they're having and the ones that we're having in, say, New York or LA. Educated, well-traveled, thinking about happiness as well as academic rigor for our kids. So our son Rainey was making huge leaps in the areas that we liked about the Chinese system. He was disciplined, he was polite, and he was making progress with numbers, with more to come in primary school. He's got a pretty amazing sense of self-control now, my husband Rob said on the second day. Yes, but have you ever seen him color? He just can't seem to draw outside the lines, and he keeps drawing dinosaurs over and over again, repeatedly. Does he get that from school? That's not true at all, my husband said. Rainey draws all kinds of things, and we're making sure he's getting opportunities to be creative at home. What about blind obedience, I asked. Are you worried about that? My husband laughed. Does he seem like a weak-willed child? Just that morning, Rainey had emerged at breakfast in an outfit he'd chosen himself. His brown corduroys clashed with his blue and white striped shirt, and I was bothered by his choices. Morning, Rainey, can you change your pants? I asked as I went into the kitchen to deposit my coffee mug. You don't match. No, my little boy said, trailing me defiantly. Did you hear what I said? I will not go change my pants. He planted himself in the doorway, holding my gaze. My husband and I rejoiced in this display of will. See, Rob said, and yesterday he arranged all of his dinosaurs in the form of an army to face off against his Star Wars characters. He called it Dinosaur Star Wars. How creative is that? You're grasping, I told my husband. But in truth, all seemed to be going fine. Anyway, that sort of tackles at some of the stereotypes around Chinese education, and I really haven't found that to be true. And, this book is really about pulling the curtain back on some of these issues. And it's not really about my parenting narrative. It's partly that, but it's also really the voices of all these other students that I follow over a number of years, as well as these education experts. There are about 150 that I interviewed for the book, and some of their voices are sort of sprinkled throughout. And I just hope to bring some understanding to the conversation and get parents and educators to think about some of these issues. So that is the overview.